Good morning, everyone. IETA, Asocarbono, USAID, and the Ministry of Sustainable Environment in Colombia welcomes you to the webinar on carbon markets and the private sector's commitment. Together with the most recent report from the IPC that most everyone read, led by the Institute on Climate Change in Berlin, it has told us about the little time we have to reach our global goals on greenhouse gas emissions. And at the current rate, we have 25 years and 8 months to avoid global warming and achieve the 1.5 degree goal. On the regulatory side, there are many initiatives worldwide covering only 21.5% of the global emissions of greenhouse gases. And the jurisdictions using emissions regulations, together with 75% of the emissions covered by carbon pricing, are below $10 per ton of CO2 equivalent. However, through several organizations such as the World Bank, based on these studies, to achieve the goal, the price should be $65 to $85 per ton of CO2. With this context, the world is now witnessing an amazing increase in corporate interest in carbon markets and direct investments in projects and opportunities for eligible programs crossing borders and sectors, including Latin America and the Caribbean. In recent months, hundreds of companies and investors have voluntarily assumed zero carbon compromises at a large scale, and many have prioritized strategic action in the short term and investments in nature-based climate solutions. 20% of the 2,000 largest companies in the world represent approximately $14 billion, have assumed that net zero commitment. On that, we have several representatives from Nestlé, Amazon, Bayer, seeking carbon neutrality with their practices, together with Bancolombia, who has established the net zero commitment as well, Citibank, and Citibank as well through 2025. Created in September of 2020, the Task Force on Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets has gathered over 250 institutions from the private sector, from various sectors such as finance, infrastructure, foods, technology, communications, industry, and civil society, and academia. This constitutes the greatest mobilization of the private sector in terms of carbon markets thus far. The goal is to create the conditions for the quick growth of voluntary carbon markets to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees maximum and achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And this entails multiplying carbon credits and the size of the voluntary market by at least 15 times. It's a historic commitment by the private sector. In numbers, the estimate is that a carbon market might represent up to $100 billion by the end of the decade versus the $300 million in 2018. This webinar will examine the current status of the corporate setting, the private sector, and their growing interest in engaging in carbon markets in Latin America and the Caribbean, together with regulatory frameworks as needed, market signals, and other tools so that countries not only provide private capital to these markets, but that also provide investments to achieve the various goals that supplement these initiatives. This event is being transmitted in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Portuguese. On the bottom of your screen, you will find a link with each language for you to choose the one you prefer. You will also find a link to a form to send in your questions to the panelists. On that form, you must write in your questions with your name, email, and the country from which you are connecting. To begin now, I will now invite Gonzalo Munoz, our keynote speaker, who will talk about racing towards a healthy recovery. He was appointed as a high-level climate champion under the United Nations on climate change to mobilize climate action throughout the world. He is the co-founder and leader of Triciclico, one of the Latin American companies that is most recognized in economic circles, operating in over 13 countries in Latin America, where the mission is to foster new business models for a waste-free world. This was also the first company to receive a B classification outside of North America. Gonzalo is a member of Bella Global and is currently an advisor on green hydrogen, electromobility, and circular economies. Welcome, and please go ahead.
Muchísimas gracias, Alexis.
Thank you so much, Alexis. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you to speak about this sense of urgency and about the importance and how important it is today that we all get involved in achieving certain goals in the least time possible. Having just seen the Olympics, I think we can all understand the importance of every second, every millisecond, every moment, especially when speaking of the possibility of being able to come out of COVID, which has been so difficult. And hopefully this will lead us to a better position, better than where we are now. And to be better than where we are now, we have to understand that there are several aspects where we are not better than we were before. A few days ago, we received the most recent report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change from the United Nations, the IPCC, showing how the consequences that we're seeing today around the climate crisis has become exacerbated, and that we are not moving at the speed that we should be moving at. Despite being so sure about the consequences of climate change, and despite seeing it throughout the world, we're seeing it not only through forest fires, but also in heat waves that are affecting the health and well-being and the assets of billions of people worldwide. Floods in China and Germany. We're seeing the crisis climate become manifest also in landslides. And we are seeing the evidence, and this is yet another image from this last report from the IPCC, showing that the climate crisis that we're experiencing is a product of how the humans on this earth have been behaving. There's no doubt about this effect, and all we have left to do is act. Act because changes will be increasingly widespread, faster, more intense, and unprecedented. Many of them are here to stay, but we still have the hopes of if we stick to the goal of the 1.5 degrees, if we stay on the path to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 at the latest, then we will be able to stabilize many of these aspects around well-being in our country. So although hopes are small, they are there and they are feasible. And it's all up to us. The tools that we have today are enough to resolve the climate crisis, and innovation will continue and development will continue. Therefore, it is key to understand that we are facing an urgent situation, something we might define as a disease in our times, a disease that affects us all, where the best possible cure is making it so that the planet's temperature does not go over does not rise by 1.5 degrees. And everything we've seen this year, at least hurricanes, sea level rising, all of that is at 1.1 degrees higher. So the treatment for this would, on one hand, be achieving net zero emissions by 2050 at the latest. And if we can do so even sooner, that'll be even better. And then we will be even more sure that we are achieving the 1.5 goal, where the temperature will become stabilized as per the scientists in the latest report. And for that, we must now start to strongly reduce emissions so that in the coming years, we're talking about maybe the first half of this decade, where we must absolutely reduce these emissions by 50% at 2030 and achieve net zero by 2050. Currently, we are at a turning point because we have the evidence, the scientific evidence, and because we have the crisis become manifest, we know that the tools to resolve this are all in our hands. They have to be scaled, but if we coordinate all together, we will undoubtedly be able to overcome this issue. So I encourage all of you listening, that we make 2021 the most impactful year for climate action. It's in our hands. That is my recommendation to you, looking at COP26 in Glasgow, but especially looking towards the evidence that we have already on hand and the certainty that action can overcome crises, and then looking into the future with a moral duty to resolve this issue for this generation and the future generations. When we look at climate action by the non-state actors, because you might say that this is up to only the nations, but the nations have given this duty to non-state actors, referring to corporations, the financial sector, but even subnational governments, mayors, governors, academia, NGOs. We were all given the space so that we might contribute towards the solutions to resolve this crisis. And that is why this agenda was created for high-level climate action champions, where every year the country that assumes the chair of the COP names this high-level champion. I was the fifth. We had Thomas Khrushchev from Polonia before me, and then Nigel Topping would be the sixth. We were the first two champions, in fact, from the private sector, and we were able to engage non-state actor actions through three main campaigns that I'd like you to learn about, and that you cannot miss out on. If you're not part of these campaigns today, you have made the decision to become part of the problem instead of being part of the solution that is needed for such a critical and urgent issue. I would say that it's even the most critical that we've ever had. So the first has to do with that Race to Zero. Race to Zero was launched in June of 2020, mobilizing all the various stakeholders from various sectors in the economy worldwide towards net zero emissions by 2050 at the latest. Let's be clear, it is not enough that we focus on 2050, because we have to reduce emissions in this decisive decade by 2030 by at least 50%, like I mentioned. So what we do now, today, this year, no later than 2025, is key. We are at a moment where history is encouraging us to become stakeholders that will reduce emissions considerably, so that we stop emitting and that we start to sequester CO2 back into the ground in an expedited manner. This Race to Zero movement, which began in June 2020, has grown almost twofold. We're missing one more column here. We are at 4,600, over 4,600 members at Race to Zero that have come on board from various countries, investors. It is a global campaign. It's a campaign that makes it so that companies, cities, subnational regions, and recently we were with Alok Sharma in Brazil, mobilizing Brazilian states, and we are now making it so that between states, companies, and cities in Brazil, we are representing now 55% of the entire country's economy, which is already committed to the race to zero. Investors are investing their money so that they can also become part of this pathway. All of this to achieve that healthy and resilient recovery at net zero emissions, to avoid future threats, but also to create opportunities, because development, progress, well-being, prosperity for humanity is based on this logic. There will be no prosperity if not through net zero emissions and if not through climate resilience. All the members of Race to Zero are committed to achieving net zero emissions by 2050 at the latest, through various scientific, traceable, trackable mechanisms that will in turn make it easy to see what reductions have been achieved in this initial decade by 2030. Like I was saying, there are over 700 cities now, and as of last week, over 30 regions. We are reaching over 3,000 companies. We have over 250 investors and over 600 universities. These figures are constantly being updated. These aren't even updated for today's presentation, but what I can say is it is a significant percentage now of the world's economy. Over 15% of the global economy is now committed to the race to zero. And when we add all it up, add this to the United Nations commissions, we are coming up on 70% of the world's commitment to that 2050 goal. Since 2019, when we began to establish commitments from nations and from companies and non-state actors towards net zero emissions, we went from 0 to almost 70% of the world's GDP that is now committed to that net zero emissions. And what does this mean? This means that this is the new standard. We must all be committed to this logic, because it isn't just about a standard that's defined by scientific criteria. It's a moral duty, and it's also where the major opportunities for development can be found. Conversely, talking about that moral duty, we also have a race to resilience. The impact of climate change is being seen constantly, especially in the most vulnerable communities in the world. That's why, as a sister campaign to Race to Zero for net zero emissions, we also developed an initiative to protect 4 billion people by 2030 from the climate crisis, so that not only they survive the crisis, but that they prosper as well. What we've done in the Race to Resilience is place resilience goals in 3 main areas: on coastal and riverine areas, of course, where tides are constantly causing damage to communities that inhabit coastal areas, urban areas as well, where human settlements are leading to loss of opportunities and loss of quality of life. We have to improve lives in urban areas as well, and in rural areas where small farmers are also being affected by the climate crisis, and many are losing their livelihoods. Therefore, the Race to Resilience is based on enhancing resilience in coastal, rural, and urban communities with those 3 approaches. And we also have, like I was saying, a focus on finance as a stakeholder that would not only promote action to protect the communities that are being affected, but would also open up all of the opportunities for technology development to technologies that are needed to resolve the crisis. And again, this is in our hands. All we need to do is scale them up. And for that, we are seeking to mobilize an increasing number of financial stakeholders, basically through 4 initiatives. The Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, these are basically pension funds that include over $9 trillion that are committed towards carbon neutrality by 2050. And then there's the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, which represents over $40 billion also from the financial sector that are also committed to net zero emissions by 2050 at the latest. And then the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which has already gathered over $30 trillion towards carbon neutrality by 2050 at the latest. So that's $88 trillion under the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. Apart from mobilizing the financial sector, we must also show the pathways that are needed for each of the world's economy sectors on these various paths. And we've called this the Race to Zero breakthroughs by 2030. Those breakthroughs seek to show that for every person that is committed today, saying, okay, I have a company in the world of foods or light transportation or cargo, or I work in construction, cement and steel, aluminum, or I work in fashion or chemicals, for any of them, there are 40 sectors of the world's economy where we have established the NS curves to show what has to happen, what technology and what level of commitment would allow for acceleration to happen, first of all. It usually happens in a linear fashion until a certain number of commitments are established and certain changes are made in technology that make it so that that linear curve becomes exponential. And then stabilization comes. So today we are mapping all these sectors of the economy to see which has to be accelerated, which is already starting to scale exponentially. That is what we have called the Race to Zero breakthroughs. In that regard, these breakthroughs are simply a roadmap so that the various stakeholders in the economy worldwide can see where they are and what technologies they have in their sector that can facilitate change, and so that each of these stakeholders can form part of that change on that pathway while leveraging opportunities. Opportunities not just for being a part of this historical pathway that we must undertake, but also to become part of the opportunities that open up in the financial world and the opportunities that open up in talent and opportunities in contributing to the nation's goals, the respective nation's goals. And then not just finance, but finance transition. We are now at a point where carbon, when it is emitted but also sequestered, is now starting to have a value and have a cost that should be reflected in finance at every level. Therefore, putting a price on carbon first, based on the global system, is key. And we see how the nations have been committing in that regard. But then every country individually must structure different systems to regulate carbon markets. And then individually, at the organizational level, we have the opportunity to learn how to measure that carbon, put a price on it, and then structure it in our organization and determine the cost of each ton of CO2 emitted and what the value is for every ton sequestered. We need this, and we need every one of you to engage in this race to zero, race to resilience, G funds. Just be a part of this decisive year where climate action must establish change. Thank you. Thank you for your very important presentation and call to action. We will now begin with our first panel with leaders from the private industrial sector, from Nestle, Amazon Inc., and Bayer. This space will be modified by Katie Sullivan, General Director of IETA. Katie is leading efforts to find market solutions and resolve the environmental challenges in the Americas and worldwide, and look at the growing initiatives on innovation, technology, and finance. Currently, she is part of the Global Directive Committee for pricing at the world market and the International Knowledge Center for carbon sequestration. The blockchain for climate foundation. In 2019, KEDI was recognized as was awarded with the Clean 16 and Clean 50 awards for contributing to clean capitalism leadership in Canada. Katie?
Thank you, Alexi. Such a great opening and start to the event with words of inspiration and call to action, but also some stark reminders from Gonzalo Munoz as we get closer to and go through COP26 in Glasgow. We're delighted to join you, or for all of you to join us today, wherever you are in Latin America and around the world. It's such a pleasure for AIDA, our team, to work closely with our partners, USAID and Aso Carbono, to bring you this special webinar series. Think of all of our virtual events, and we've had a lot of them since last year. Today's session might be one of the highest registration levels we've seen. And that's popularity is not a surprise. Carbon markets and pricing, nature-based solutions, and accelerating private finance at scale into these activities is a very hot and urgent topic. As we'll hear today, the interest by companies and investors to channel private climate capital into Latin America and Caribbean projects is growing dramatically. And this trend is expected to continue, but only if there are appropriate market solutions, long-term price signals, and safeguards put in place. With governments and investors and thousands of companies and companies announcing enhanced climate ambition and net zero commitments, we're only at the beginning of this critical and transformative journey. But we have a lot of work ahead to maximize both climate and co-benefit across Latin America. And we have to work fast, and we must collaborate. So I am honored to be joined by leaders across the corporate and industry community. It's a fantastic panel representing some of the biggest companies in the world. Not only have they made ambitious global corporate climate and net zero commitments, but they also have major investments, assets, employees, and interests across Latin America and the Caribbean. Each company is also in the throes of using, or at least navigating, scaling LATAM investments in climate action, especially across nature-based solutions. So with that, first of all, I thank everybody who has welcomed me to the panel and allow me to speak in English, and the interpreters. All of my speakers, I believe, have chosen to speak in Spanish. And I will give quick bios before we get into their stories. So first, we'll have Edgar Blanco, and Edgar's the director of Amazon's worldwide net zero carbon team. This is where he leads Amazon's internal transformation to reduce its carbon footprint. He also has over 25 years of experience and is widely recognized as an expert on carbon footprint assessments and global supply chains and environmental impact of freight transport and logistics. We then have Eduardo Bastos, Latin America Sustainability Director at Bayer. And this is where he leads a lot of efforts to implement a host of climate and sustainability initiatives across the region. He has over 25 years of experience working in agriculture, food systems, sustainability worldwide. And he's an incredibly active corporate leader in stakeholder engagement and Latin America partnerships with a focus on sustainable land use and agriculture. And then last, but certainly not least, we'll have Carlos Barragan, Director of Corporate Affairs at Nestle, coming to us from Colombia. He has a truly impressive background across academia, private sector, and government, including previously serving as Colombia's ambassador in Switzerland and minister of the embassy for Belgium and the EU, where he was responsible for commercial and human rights issues before the European Parliament. If you want to learn more about these impressive bios and backgrounds, feel free to go to the event website. But we have to get in to the guts. And first, I'd love to welcome actually Edgar from Amazon to join us. tell us his story. As a reminder, not that anybody needs a reminder, Amazon, Amazon, the company, has enormous reach and impact. It's the world's largest online retailer, and it's one of the largest companies in the world. So our audience, myself included, would love a full and updated picture, Edgar, about the highlights of Amazon's major climate net zero targets, including the status of some of the biggest initiatives through COP26, the Climate Pledge, and also leaning into the nature-based solutions, status of expectations with the Right Now Climate Fund. Edgar, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, Katie, muchas gracias, and thanks, Katie, again, and for everyone for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Yo había dicho que iba a hacer mis comentarios en
I did say that I would be speaking Spanish, but I just wanted to cover many things. So I might be switching between Spanish and English, and I'll confuse everyone by doing so. Okay, but let me get started. And
it's truly a pleasure to be part of this panel. Let's talk about Amazon and our net zero carbon commitments. We actually are committed in Amazon to start with science. And science have told us, and the remarks from Gonzalo and Alexis kind of pointed out to the fact that we really have a limited window to make the unprecedented headway we need in order to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees by 2050. And no one company or organization can do this on its own. Everyone must do their part. And the call to action that Gonzalo put at the beginning of this session is really the right way to do it. On our end, to drive that collective action, Amazon co-founded the Climate Pledge in partnership with Global Optimism, and that was in 2019, with the conviction that we need to act with urgency on the climate crisis. The Climate Pledge, for those of you who are not familiar, is a commitment to be net zero carbon by 2040. That's 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement. It's not easy. It's a tall order for us and all the other 100+ companies that have already accepted this challenge and that are on our way. So that's kind of the first highlight. Our net zero carbon commitments through the Climate Pledge are to be net zero carbon by 2040. Where are we on this commitment and how much progress we've made? We still have a long way to go, but our first priority is to drive significant reductions in our own value chain. And that's really where a lot of our efforts are focused inside the company. And these efforts are in line with the science and making sure that we invest not only on things that we know how to reduce, but also invest on future technologies that will help us reduce our emissions in the long term. A few highlights of the progress. In 2019, we ordered 100,000 custom electric vehicles for our last mile fleet. This is the largest ever order of such a fleet in transportation. And we're super excited to see those first vehicles showing up in roads in North America, in various cities. So if you happen to be in one of those and you spot them, they're very technologically advanced. But we are doing the same in Europe. We have over 1,800 vans already from Mercedes-Benz that is a Climate Pledge signatory, by the way, already on the road, delivering over 20 million packages around the world. India, we are also adding 10,000 electric vehicles. Electrification, again, is a key part of our logistics infrastructure, and we are just making tons of progress in North America, Europe, and India. And the vehicles in India are going to be locally sourced and manufactured. Energy. In 2020, we also became the largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy. And as part of our path, we are committed to be 100% renewable energy by 2025. And that's 5 years ahead of our plan of 2030 when we started this journey. And we make progress on solar, wind, and all kinds of initiatives across the world. And then finally, I mentioned about the things we know how to solve, the things that we don't know how to solve. And we have also launched a $2 billion fund dedicated to invest on companies whose products or technologies help transition Amazon and other companies to a low carbon economy. Cement, for example, is a huge challenge. So our fund has invested in cement technologies. We have turbines. We have hydrogen aircrafts. We really are across the portfolio, because without proper investments across the value chain, we cannot really reduce. So that's about our progress. Still lots to do and lots to learn, but we're very proud of what we've done so far. But we need to do more. I mean, we all know that even if we reduce our emissions in line with science, we'll still emit some carbon on our way to zero. And we are planning to bridge this future by making sure we have additional investment now so we can neutralize our emissions over and above our science-based targets. And I think that's a part of what we're going to talk more about today. But we want to make sure that we help reduction of deforestation, that we have solutions allow us to remove carbon from the atmosphere, and of course, scale those technologies across the world. And today we are really focusing heavily on the deforestation components, recognizing that deforestation rates need to sharply decline over the next decade to put us in the Paris Agreement targets within reach. And that's where we have, that was the impetus for the LEAF coalition. And LEAF stands for Lowering Emissions by Accelerating Forest Finance, which is a public-private initiative that Amazon launched together with leading companies that are here in the panel, Nestle and Bayer, along with governments from the US and UK, to provide $1 billion of financial support to tropical forest jurisdiction and the economies within those communities to reduce deforestation and degradation. And with that, maybe I'll open to the other panelists, and then we can talk more about this. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Edgar. That is a great way to start us off. Heroic efforts, really. These are major, major ambitions. And for context, Edgar, about how many employees are at Amazon now globally?
Wow, I'll get to you in a minute. The numbers have changed so much over the last 6 months with our growth. We have not only our direct employees, but we have a network of partners that we use. So I'll get to give you the final number in a few minutes.
It's enormous. The main takeaway is you are not shrinking anytime soon. So I would actually love now, Eduardo, to tell us your story at Bayer. I have had the privilege really of working closely with a number of your colleagues at Bayer globally, which is one of the biggest pharmaceutical and life sciences companies in the world. So can you tell us about Bayer's global approach to climate action, how your carbon program has expanded across Latin America, and also highlight why agriculture and farmer-centric approaches really are at the core of a lot of Bayer's climate action? Eduardo?
Thank you, Katie. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I will be speaking in English so that my Spanish-speaking friends do not suffer with my Portuñol.
For this kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, especially in that panel with all of you folks, the companies that we are working together now to change these, as Gonzalo mentioned in the beginning, not possible to do that by ourselves. So despite the fact that, yes, we are a big company, 110,000 employees all over the world, but we truly understand the power to convene good partners to move in the right direction. So what we've done so far, we are committed to be carbon neutral by 2030. We are signing Race to Zero. We are moving in the Science-Based Targets initiative. We are celebrating 125 years in Latin America, 160 years in the world. So we are a quite old company, I can say, but at the same time, very new in the thinking about, okay, how can we work to contribute in the long run? We understand that agriculture, it's a big part of our business. It's 50% today. It's 50% pharmaceuticals and consumer, 50% agriculture. But thinking about the generation of impact, agriculture definitely it's the biggest part of these of the challenge in our company. So yes, we understand and we are committed to help to reduce 30% the greenhouse gases emissions in agriculture in the world till 2030. So we understand this is quite challenging, but again, we want to do that together with partners, governments, research companies. We won't open the science, the good science that we can bring on board. So we are open that actually though to us to contribute, to collaborate. Yes, we know that agriculture play a very important role. As FAO says, agriculture can solve 25% of the climate change solutions. But if we don't do that in a right way, agriculture also plays a role in emissions. So 22% of the global emissions come from agriculture. So yes, we have almost 1/4 of the problem. Yes, we have almost 1/4 of the solutions. So that's exactly what we are doing. We started this last year, a project with farmers in Brazil and then US. This year, we're expanding to Argentina. Definitely, we'll expand to Paraguay and then all of the other countries in the region in Latin America. We just launched the European program in July, a month ago. So we are expanding not just countries, but also we're expanding to crops. We started this project with soybean and corn. Now we are moving to include coffee, to include pastures, and then all the other things that came with pastures like dairy and beef, sugarcane, cotton. It's a journey. We understand that there's a lot of challenges around tropicalization of MRVs. As we are in tropical region, we understand that, yes, we are working with Verra, Gold Standards, Article 6. All those things are really good, but most of them created in temperated countries, so we cannot just copy-paste in our tropical part of the world as we are. So a lot of fun on the road. I'm sure that we will get there, and we will get that faster as far as we understand that together we can do much more incredible things to the world, to the sectors that we are working. And that's my initial remarks here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. I was wondering who would be the first to mention Article 6. So you get the gold star. Article 6 is an issue that is near and dear to our business community and AIDA's heart. So don't go anywhere, but I'd love to pass it over to Carlos Barragan at Nestle. Now we're looking at the world's biggest food conglomerate. And you also, Nestle, have made ambitious 2030, 2050 net zero climate commitments. First, tell us a bit about the plan so we have context and the corporate actions and investments that are featuring prominently in net zero roadmap for the company. Second, and now knowing your background more with respect to human rights, right, and negotiation, I really appreciate how you want to make sure that the picture is clear about how Nestle's prioritizing mitigation opportunities across LATAM that also support broader socioeconomic goals and other SDGs, food security, human rights. So Carlos, I'll hand it over to you, please.
Well, thank you so much, Katie. And I will switch to Spanish. I would like to share my real ideas. First, well, okay. Lo primero que tengo que decir.
So the first thing I must say is that I am from Bogota. And when we talk about climate change and greenhouse and the greenhouse effect, I remember when I was a child and I would go to a lagoon close to my home in Bogota to look at the ducks. I have a 5-year-old boy today, and that lagoon where I would go and see the ducks is today a building, and it's all cement, and that lagoon is longer there. And I think about what kind of planet we want to leave for future generations. So with that, I can begin to talk about our commitment, our net zero commitment by 2050, and to also achieve 50% by 2030. Resolving issues. To resolve issues, you must identify issues. And just like Edgar was saying, our science data, our baseline that we were able to establish a few years ago, told us that 95% of our carbon footprint comes from our supply chain. And from there, 65% involves our raw material, mostly agricultural raw material. That's why we not only are working towards 2050, but we are also starting to take action immediately, actually as of a few years ago now. And that's why, in addition to that, by 2025, we will have achieved 20% of our carbon footprint reduction. Additionally, many of our brands are achieving net neutrality in 2022 and 2025. Nestle Waters, Nespresso, and others. One of the main challenges that we face as a company is that the communities, the women and the youth especially, become the center of any initiative that involves reducing climate change. Any initiative, any project that we have to address climate change has a component that involves communities, has a component that involves women, and has a component that involves the youth, which is the global strategy that we have in place now. To provide opportunities by conserving and protecting the environment, and also to, of course, protect food security and nutrition, just like our champion mentioned today as the keynote speaker. That's really important to us. There are also many efforts being made on the economic side. We, of course, in the coming 4 or 5 years, this is just not being implemented. We are investing $3.5 billion, including $1.5 billion for agriculture, regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture is a concept today that is becoming mandatory for all of our companies, which is not only about preserving the ground so that it is productive, but making that ground making the ground more suitable, even better than it was before. It's restoration. It's about returning those ecosystems that we used to see before. But it's also about resilience in communities. It's really important to work with the communities, and it's really important to work with the youth to create that awareness. One specific case in Colombia, very proudly, I can tell you that we have taken the first step as one of the very first Nestle markets to become plastic neutral. What does plastic neutral mean? It means that the total plastics that we place in Colombia, we recover, we collect it, and we put it into chains that can give that plastic a second life. This was a goal that we had by 2022 and that we were able to achieve in 2021. We were certified by the Ministry of Environment for this carbon neutrality practice. And this is a practice that now every company is doing. And we're also involving important stakeholders to leverage this plastic further. Also, in Colombia, Colombia is the second country after Brazil with the most biodiversity, but is facing enormous challenges in forest fires, in deforestation, in, of course, climate change as a whole, which has affected Colombia extensively. Colombia has a part of the Amazon as well, the lungs of the world. And that's why we are working together with the Ministry of Environment to train the youth, to recruit youth leaders, leaders on the environment, and then train them in a certificate course through a university on environmental management. Many Colombians, we don't know what we have. So that's one of the things we're definitely addressing. And of course, we have this global commitment of 20 million trees per year. We will achieve 300 million trees planted by 2030. And we not only want to plant trees, but also work on restoration and renovation for forests. This, in general terms, is what we've been doing at our company, together with the impact we've been having. And again, to our company, it is super important that communities become the center of our initiatives. The generational changeover is involved here as well. We want the youth to have opportunities in the field and there earn their incomes and not have to come to the cities to seek out other opportunities. And that's why we also have a coffee grower school for the youth in one of the areas in Colombia with the best tasting coffee. It's called Risaralda in the coffee region. We're working with them so that their projects in their coffee farms include methodologies and practices that will help them to achieve quality, productivity, and sustainability, together with other international stakeholders. The IDH, which is a body, it's an NGO from the Netherlands that will help them in best practices on forestry and to help livestock farmers to improve their practices and water management and the use of solar panels to create incomes for them. And our company also acknowledges these best practices as premium practices for when they become our vendors.
Things to share and a lot of good practices to share. Can I keep going, or Katie, should I stop?
Well, I mean, you've given a lot of great information and context, and I don't want to cut you off, but we are running out of time, and we want to have a bit of discussion. But do you have any final, thoughts right now about just the Nestlé story?
Yes, para nosotros, y vuelvo y lo repito.
Sure. And to us, and I just mentioned this with the other panelists, we cannot get there alone. We cannot achieve neutrality or net zero alone. This is something that has to be done with governments, with communities, with civil society, with other companies, with everyone. And this is one of the priorities that we have for Sustainable Development Goals. Let's recall that the Millennium Goals, before the Sustainable Development Goals, spoke about and created obligations in developing countries. The SDGs today, what they do is make it so that we are all responsible, private sector, public sector, academia, individuals, families. So I think that by having some notion of that size and the 2050 goals, the effort has to be done by all of us so that our children and our future generations can not only see, but also enjoy what we enjoyed. And of course, climate change places all of our businesses in jeopardy. So,
gracias, Katie. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. And if our organizers managing the platform could bring all of our speakers onto the same screen, that would be helpful. Also, we have been receiving some questions from the audience. We will not have time to get to all of them, but we will certainly try to find time to do follow-up after. Taking advantage of our time and the main theme for today's event, I'd like to talk about some of the carbon market thinking and the activities and the strategies. To start us, Edgar, I think it's important, mitigation hierarchy comes up a lot now in these corporate discussions and the voluntary market, when to go to voluntary market, and looking at really any of our companies here today, certainly Amazon, you are operationalizing and being guided by a mitigation hierarchy. If you could say, a few words about that, and when high quality offsets, is used, makes the most sense. And I'd also love for you to speak a bit more about LEAF, just given the audience, and it's relatively new, LEAF. Only in April it was announced, but it certainly could have a major impact in the region, and also through partnerships, as Carlos says, like it really takes advantage of the partnerships, those coalition building with governments and companies. So Edgar?
Great, perfect. Thank you, Katie. And I will get to that hierarchy. Again, I think that the one of the key things, and again, Amazon, as I mentioned, we have, and you mentioned at the beginning, we have so many businesses. We're so large. So our in terms of our hierarchy, we think of our priorities as our road to net zero. The first thing we're actually doing, and we did even way before we announced some of the commitments we have, is to make carbon available to every key business owner. Carbon in Amazon is not like a side thing that people do, is part of our normal operational components. Unless we give that to the people that make decisions day to day, they will not only be able to move as fast as we need to, but also that we need them to be as engaged as our maybe more focused teams in sustainability. And that starts with measurement, real-time measurement of our impact across our business. We should start with measurement, science, properly vetted. We hear a lot of things from the news that this is bad, this is worse, that we should remove that noise. And that noise distracts the business to focus where it really matters. Then, as I mentioned earlier, then just focus on the parts of the business that we control. I mean, we have many levers that we could use, and we always start there. And that includes prioritizing. There's many things we could do. There's so many dimensions of environmental impact, including carbon, and within carbon, so many levers: transportation, packaging, electricity, buildings, and even more. We need to make sure we know which ones are the ones that we have the biggest impact. We can move fast and invest in those quickly. And that's kind of how has guided our efforts. And in the background, we continue to look at the whole portfolio, including our projections of growth over the next 20 years, which are very hard to do for a company like Amazon, which, by the way, I forgot to say, we are now 1.2 million employees. We added like almost 250,000 the last quarter. So I didn't want to quote the wrong number from the last report. Let's talk about then mitigation. I mentioned earlier deforestation. I mean, we believe that we need to not only reduce our footprint, engage our partners through the climate pledge, but also we need to start thinking about neutralization of our emissions, the ones that we cannot reduce. And that's really what LEAF really is all about. We are projecting our growth as a company. We're projecting the growth of all these corporate partners. We're all going to go to the market and try to get those offsets. And once we go and get those offsets, if they're not available way ahead of time, what will happen is that the quality will not be great. I think that's where we started way early with this very ambitious coalition that is, I think, took a slightly different approach. We are looking at jurisdiction level commitments as opposed to project level, not because projects are not right and projects are not the right mechanisms, but rather we need to look at this at the planetary level. And that usually means at the jurisdictional level, a huge swath of natural resources that we need to conserve. And we need to provide the mechanisms for the super large forests to be preserved. Sometimes the projects are enough, but in some areas of the world, they are not enough. We need to engage the local government so they have the right mechanisms internally, so there are not any shortcuts taken. Again, this needs to be permanent, need to be high quality, need to be additional. And even though that could be assured at the project level, we believe that a jurisdictional approach, looking at a vast region, just makes that process easier for everyone. And just make it compatible. So you're right, this is a fairly new initiative. So we just opened our first call and we received over 30 proposals from tropical forest jurisdictions around the world that cover more than 500 million hectares of forest. Let me just say that number again. These proposals cover more than 500 million hectares of forest that we are considering. And that's the scale that we wanna start accelerating. Again, Bayer, Nestle are partners in this journey. We are, as companies, sending the signal to the market that we're here to stay, that we're going to make large purchases, and that we want the frameworks in place for those purchases to be, those offsets to be high quality, properly measured, paid fairly, and properly engaged with the communities. And that's what the jurisdictional approach provides some value. We can use scale to reduce the cost of everyone. We can use scale to make sure that we provide the support they need. And we use scale so we can buy all of them, and they don't have to think and go to the market and sell one at a time. So anyway, so that's kind of a few of the remarks on that regard.
Very, it's B, that's billion with a B, hectares, and over 1 million employees with an M. It's really an important initiative that's quickly evolving. It's getting a lot of attention. So Eduardo, I would love to hear a bit more about the work, some of the details, not going too into the details, about how there's leveraging carbon markets and standards and transparently priced rewards for farmers, and what models in the region would you point to as really exceptional models to possibly replicate or adopt elsewhere?
Great, Katie. Thank you. I will try to keep in the 5 minutes that we have. But what we are doing so far, we decided to work in 3 pillars: the ABC, or climate smart agriculture, agricultura bajo carbono, agricultura baixo carbono. So those are this is the first pillar. The second one is MRV, and the third is market. So when you think about the initial point, the ABC, it's how can we help farmers to implement good practices that will increase soil organic matter, and then soil organic carbon, and then productivity. So this is the key challenge. As Carlos mentioned, it's all about regenerative agriculture. It's a buzzword today, but the reality is non-tillage farmers, they're doing that in the last 50 years. So the beauty here is how can you help farmers again to rebuild the soil organic matter? And in most of the cases, we can only do that doing rotational systems, non-tillage, nitrogen use. So there's a lot of good technologies that we can use. Some of them are there for 1,000 or 10,000 years, like we are doing rotational systems for a couple thousand years. So there is a way. The second pillar, when you think about the MRV, the measure, report, and verification, this is, my opinion, the key element in agriculture. So every time that I talk to partners that call me, say, Edu, I want 20 million tons of carbon. And I come and say, good luck. Okay, you can find that, in forests to stop deforestation, the REDD+ projects, like we mentioned here, the LEAF that we are also proudly a member. But thinking about agriculture, there's a challenge to prove that, yes, the carbon is there. So, and to do that, and our goal here today, it's about make it cheaper. So today it costs more than $20, and most of the carbon in the world, we are talking about not more than 10. So that's the reality. Farmers, they will invest 20 to receive 10. They won't invest. They are not crazy. So that's a challenge that we have. We want to reduce that cost to not more than $1 per hectare, and then all the farmers can join that. The second point, it's the MRV is scalable. So today I have to dig a trench, 1.5 meters depth, extract soil samples, send to a laboratory. Come on, we can do that better. No, there is technologies that we can use, like NASA is using in Mars. So even we are not collecting soil samples in Mars, so why we can do that on Earth, our own planet? So there's a way to do that in a much cheaper, much scalable way. For sure, there's a challenge for tropicalize. But when you think about tropicalize, it's not just do crazy stuff. It's work with science, work with academia to bring the best papers, submit that to UNFCCC, all the science layers. We are doing that. So we brought Embrapa. We are moving to work. Actually, we are moving with IICA, Instituto Interamericano de Cooperação Agrícola para Agricultura. And with IICA, we do have a project named Living Soils of Americas, LISA, Suelos Vivos de la América, Solos Vivos da América. So the Living Soils, I strongly recommend to all of you to see what we are doing there. It's a Pan-American initiative that we can bring all the countries all over the Americas, including Canada and US, not I'll put just in comma, I'm Brazilian, so not just Latin America, but the whole Pan-American initiative. It's really cool. And exactly the same idea. So how can we help to bring MRVs, tropicalized MRVs? And then finally, we're talking about markets. So how can we accelerate or speed up the voluntary markets? We understand that some of those markets won't be regulated. But yes, we can do. We can talk a lot about voluntary markets, for example, in coffee, dairy, whatever. That we have companies that are willing to acquire more sustainable products, so they are working with farmers, and then we can help because we are the biggest company for input to agriculture. So yes, we can work in the whole value chain to reduce the emissions in the beginning, and then again working together to move in that direction. It's a journey. It's not easy. I can assure to you to tropicalize those things. But again, we have a lot of good partners, such as Professor Hatan Lau, that is leading the efforts through IICA, and to bring back the quality of soils, bring back soil organic matter. And finally, it's really important to understand that I'm agronomist by formation, but most of the soils in Latin America, in tropical regions all over the world, they are poor soils. So they don't have the capacity to storage nutrients. If you want to do that, we can add clay, which is very difficult. No, it's not feasible, but we can add organic matter. But you know what? Organic matter, it's also about carbon. So for most of the farmers, increased organic matter means increased productivity. So we can feed the world, but at the same time, we can increase carbon capture. That's our main goal, and that's the way that we decided to move. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Eduardo. I wish we had half a day to talk about all these things, the Pan-Hemispheric cooperation, advanced MRV. Oh my gosh, what a burgeoning space right now. But I'm getting the hook, the proverbial hook as a moderator but I would never forgive myself if I did not allow Carlos to have just a very quick final word, especially Carlos, given your experience, contacts with governments in the region, having worked in government before. What would you say to government colleagues who are watching today about what they could do to expedite progress, particularly related to high quality carbon markets, cooperation, and co-benefits to help Nestle and other corporates realize their goals?
Thank you, Katie. I promise I will be very short. Uno de los partnerships teniendo.
One of the, well, having partnerships, or through partnerships, you can have a greater impact. Our company, connected to the government's program to plant 180 million trees in Colombia. And that is an international commitment through the World Economic Forum for the 1 trillion trees initiative. And we are part of that strategy. But also, like I was saying, many of the materials can also create greenhouse gases. And that's why we have the plastic neutrality initiative as well. That is where we are also sharing that experience with the other markets to establish partnerships. The United Nations Circular Economy Program for the Environment that we are also aligning with involves that. And then, of course, we're also signing agreements for zero deforestation in our chains through the Tropical Forest Alliance. I think that something that we should definitely have in our DNA is this concept of rethinking. If you look at my background here, I think there are many things that have to be applied there. To reduce, to rethink, in addition to recycling. I mean, I think education and pedagogy to consumers and our stakeholders is extremely important to achieve the impact that we want to achieve. My takeaway would be that it is a collective effort that we must all engage in.
casa en la
At
separación.
my house through composting and also at my house by separating glass, paper, etc. And I won't go too deep into what Eduardo was saying, but it's also about going beyond organic agriculture. It's beyond regenerative agriculture. It's about involving the communities so that through these practices they can improve their incomes. Like Eduardo said, using organic fertilizer, water management. Colombia is susceptible to flooding and to torrential rains. When we go out to the farms, our vendors' farms, and we teach them how to create channels and canals so that water is absorbed better into the ground, with that, we are also helping in carbon capture through biodiversity. So,
practices and about what we have been doing, what we haven't done, our commitments. But let me just finish with something. We have a lot of milestone by 2022. Even in Colombia, nuestras fábricas, our factories trabajan con 100% energía renovable.
Where our factories are working with 100% renewable energy. Our packaging in Colombia is 98% reusable. We changed the Milo, we changed our packaging there as well. So it is a long journey.
In our initiatives, in what we have been doing, making partnerships, making society, making alliance, and making communities better for their own benefits. So this is my takeaway, and thank you so much. I don't want to stay.
It is a great way to wrap. It has been an absolute honor moderating this session. Thank you so much, Edgar, Eduardo, and Carlos. I will pass it back to Alexi for the next great panel, this time leaning into the financial sector views. So thanks again. Enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you.
Gracias a Katie y todos nuestros panelistas.
Thank you, Katie, and to all of our panelists. It truly was a grand panel. I remind you that you can send in your questions through www.mercadosdecarbono.com. Continuing on with the second panel, we now have leaders from the financial sector from Bancolombia, Citibanamex, and ABD. This space will be moderated by Eduardo Piquero, Director of Mexico CO2, the platform for creating environmental markets and the Mexican stock market to boost green bond markets to facilitate Mexico's emissions goals. In 2015, Eduardo led the Green Finance Committee, gathering over 350 institutions in the financial world. He has been a consultant on climate change mitigation under the United Nations Program for the Environment and Director of Operations at MGM International and South Pole Carbon for Mexico. Eduardo, welcome, and please go ahead with the panel. Thank you so much, Alexis. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, from wherever you are, and welcome to this panel on private finance in Latin America. And we truly have an impressive panel, a great lineup, and we just heard from Gonzalo, in fact, about the sectors of the economy that actually play a significant role in this road towards emissions neutrality. And we also heard two very important things. One is that this year is key. What we do now through the next 3 or 4 years will be decisive. And by 2030, it will be too late. So action has to begin now. And this would be impossible without the financial sector. The financial sector is the muscle of the economy. And to paraphrase Gonzalo, let's think of the Olympics once again. No muscles, no medals. And with no medals, no awards, no prizes. So today we have the medal winners from Latin America. So it's a great pleasure to have them here with us. We have a transcontinental panel of leaders and experts in green finance. It is a decisive panel. And over the next 45 minutes, we will hear from them to help all of you in your decision-making for the coming days, weeks, and months. So let's begin with the panelists. From north to south, we first have Maria Neto from the Inter-American Development Bank. She is the Director of Financial Markets and Specialist on Green Markets at the IDB. helping banks in Latin America and the Caribbean to create green finance strategies. She worked in the United Nations Program for Development, supervising a worldwide program to measure investment flows and financing for over 10 years. In the United Nations Framework for Climate Change, she was responsible for climate finance and was part of the team that established the institutional framework for implementing the market mechanism under the Kyoto Protocol, that what we all know as carbon markets. She has a master's from the Swiss Institute for International Studies in Switzerland, of course. Maria, welcome. In one phrase, what will you be speaking about? Thank you so much. Thank you, Eduardo. We will then have Alan Gomez Hernandez from Citibanamex. He is the VP for Sustainable Banking at Citibanamex and is leading the team that is ensuring the full integration of the sustainable strategy at Citi, especially addressing green finance, together with risk and credit processes and the impact on the environment at the financial group, and is representing Citi on climate change initiatives and throughout Latin America. He has 14 years of experience in developing and implementing sustainable strategies for climate change in companies, cities, governments, was the coordinator for the sustainability team at the Banking Society of Mexico, as well as on the task force on financial disclosures, climate financial disclosures, and has a degree in environmental engineering from Autónoma Metropolitana University with an MBA in sustainable business from Lumberg University in Germany. What will you be speaking about today? Thank you. Good morning, and thanks to Aira. I will be speaking about Citibanamex's strategy for climate change, and I will also be speaking somewhat more about the situation on climate risk in Latin America. Okay, Alan, thank you so much and welcome. We will now continue closer to the equator. In Colombia, we have Franco Pisa, who is the corporate director of sustainability at Bancolombia. He's a public accountant and a specialist in organizational development and finance, with executive programs on creating value, sustainability, and circular economies. He's an expert on international standards for sustainability in the financial world and has over 28 years of experience in regional banking. He's responsible for the group's sustainability strategy, where he leads initiatives to achieve everyone's well-being. He represents the principles on responsible banking at the organization, at the Strategic Committee for Global Investments and Sustainable Development, together with other initiatives under the United Nations, and is also part of the expert group of advisors at Science Based Targets to define goals for the financial sector globally. Welcome, Franco. What will you be speaking about today in one phrase? Thank you, Eduardo, for the invitation. I'll be talking about three things, basically. Mostly dealing around the climate strategy in Colombia and investment markets and carbon markets. Okay, thank you so much. Excellent. So we have an information-packed panel, and let's begin with you, Maria. Maria, it would seem as though there is no way of achieving net zero emissions at any company or any region alone without nature-based solutions that would allow for quantifying impacts and for commercializing those offsets or emissions. So what is the plan at the Inter-American Bank in that regard, and what role can companies play in the region in this process? Thank you, Eduardo. We at the IDB, as part of our 2025 vision, see green finance and particularly the need to boost investments that promote natural capital as key for the green economy in the region. The Latin American region has one advantage comparatively to the rest of the world. We have over 30% of biodiversity. We have a large number of natural assets in the Amazon, but also in other parts of the region with great potential. So to begin, there is a major amount of capital in that regard, but we do have a significant issue in creating monetized added value to this natural capital. Our strategy is that we believe that developing value chains and developing finance for activities that focus on natural capital do have a very positive impact, not just because they have that added value for carbon, but also because it creates economic diversity with great long-term potential, including in terms of technology, market access, and everything else. So to us, it isn't just about the price of carbon, but also about the opportunity of stimulating these activities and providing a carbon price can bring economic alternatives. In the Amazon specifically, looking in our region, which is a priority area for the IDB, we do have that area determined, and it has a great potential to reduce deforestation by providing economic alternatives that are more consistent with the natural capital on one hand, and that are also activities that exert much less pressure on deforestation, activities such as mining and other local activities. So we have to look at this as a chain, as a value chain, as a value-added chain, because carbon pricing alone will not make the change. It's about how to engage the carbon pricing into these strategies. So our strategy has been to work with companies in promoting bioeconomies, and we have an important strategy in that regard that we are structuring with several public actors and our private sector, together with BidInvest, who does financing through private banks, to create lines of finance that can structure these value chains. So the question is how to add to this from a financial standpoint, how to bring the financial sector to bear on this initiative, and how to create the conditions in a market, an ecosystem that would allow for these projects to engage in the carbon market. So by stimulating private companies and businesses in these areas so that they can do business that truly conserves natural assets, but that also values the potential we have with that local natural capital, how can we create a business environment for that? Much of what we've been doing is working with the government on one hand to see how we can better value and better monitor as well, because that's also an important factor when looking at these kinds of projects. And then on the other hand, it's also about creating a business environment that is market-centric. When talking about assets and carbon markets, these markets are still driven very differently between countries. There's a lot of legal uncertainty about the carbon credits themselves. If I will work with an organization in the Amazon to establish value chains that could have a positive impact in terms of carbon credits, how can I then establish that so that the credit is not questioned and that the price at which it is being sold and bought can be properly estimated? So to ensure that integration, it's really important to work with these product-based or nature-based initiatives. The other major field in which we work is capital markets. We've been engaging with these markets in a region, and we believe that it can be really interesting to look at carbon bond development associated with natural capital. There, many interesting things have been taking place, for example, in the Caribbean. And there's also great potential in the Amazon region, again, where there's a lot of biodiversity. We see interesting potential not just for private companies there, but also for governments, where sovereign bonds can be used and can be used for financing. And again, the carbon pricing could be an additional incentive, especially because carbon credits can provide investors with certain assurances, because it does ensure the return. And we also believe in providing platforms that can provide transparency and information about trade itself. We are looking at that increasingly. Your platform, Eduardo, is one of those examples, but many countries are developing similar platforms that can also stimulate the markets through transparency to see what's being done with the credits, what the price is, who's buying, and who's selling. And I'll stop for now there. Excellent. Thank you so much, Maria. And that's some subject, transparency. We could have a whole webinar to talk about transparency in Latin America. Alan, we'll continue with you now. Citibanaméx's position is unique. It is a global bank with a Mexican spirit. It's the Mexican National Bank. It's in the DNA, just like the tequila and chili. So Citibanaméx's view as a global bank and locally as well is unique in every sense of the word. How is the bank positioning itself to address the public with advanced products to make the financial sector more green in Mexico? Sure. Well, honestly, that is a significant challenge, a challenge that we've had globally. Citi is one of the most global banks in the world. Specifically in Mexico, like you're saying, we did assume the name of the Mexican National Bank, and that entails a certain major responsibility. The bank in Mexico has been operating for 137 years. We are one of the main banks, fortunately. The public continues to prefer us. And honestly, we do have a major commitment. And the commitment is something that we've been developing now for over 90, I would say even 100 years, through certain activities that have been helping the population with natural disasters, as well as with cultural foundations, which have a great tradition here in the country, together with social foundations that were created in the 90s and subsequently. We have also been working with financial education and volunteer work, which are the two most recent fields in Mexico. Sustainability began in 2011, 2012, the Sustainability Division, and then there's the Corporate Division that was created in 2019 to that same end. On corporate citizenship, we are seeking a comprehensive strategy based on 4 pillars. The first is economic development. The second is environment and climate change. The third is responsible financing. And the fourth is equal opportunities. So this strategy is built on the foundation of the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically, and it extends to all of our business areas and operations. It is a strategy that undoubtedly answers to, or is a response to the current situation in the country and in the world, and establishes parameters that guide our actions and performance. We're talking about economic measures, well-being measures, environmental measures. We're also talking about having inclusive and cross-cutting initiatives as well. So again, we're working based off SDGs, 8 of them initially, which are the same that Citi has assumed for its strategy, plus one that is specific to Mexico that we found very relevant, and that is SDG 17 on partnerships. I'd like to say that at the city level, these kinds of strategies, the Sustainable Progress Strategy, which is guiding us globally, is also based on these SDGs, but also includes, in the very first line of reporting, a mandate and a monitoring of the scorecard to follow in the progress and performance we've had. And in Mexico, this has already been implemented. Our current CEO in Mexico, Manuel Romo, already has a line on his scorecard measuring progress on SDGs, climate change, etc. Also, in that first line of report, that line of report also is included in other dashboards, and that means that our benefits, our bonds, as they are achieved, they would all depend on compliance. They depend on this compliance with these lines. Now, globally, I can tell you that the Sustainable Progress Strategy for City is based on three main items that also match the work that we're doing in Mexico specifically, where obviously we are working in a coordinated way. So on matters of climate change, I can tell you that we have three very specific lines of work. The first is that we have to support the country and the world and the region towards a clean, towards clean initiatives. We do this through green financing. We have a taxonomy that determines what is green and what is not green, and with that, we can monitor and establish goals that we have been establishing actually since 2017. The first was for $50 billion. The second was $100 billion. The third was announced last year, was for $250 billion. And then this coming year, when Jane Fraser comes in as the new CEO, with the new CEO, we can see how things are moving. We see interest by our clients and by our investors and by our stakeholders. So we definitely have to be more ambitious and go beyond that. So the new goal that is being established is for $500 billion by 2030. And that is a goal that won't stop at climate and in the environment, but will also include another $500 billion goal for social. In that regard, a strategy was recently announced called the Net Zero Strategy. And with Net Zero, we will incorporate these initiatives through 2050 to address not only emissions in our operations and in our businesses, but also in helping our clients in that transition. And this is where that second pillar of these sustainable progress and the strategy comes in, where we are developing and implementing and piloting recommendations from the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, the famous TCFP that many in this meeting know of. And since 2017, we have been working globally under this initiative as well. At the global level with City in 2017, the years the years kind of get away from me. In between 2017 2018, we had the first pilot looking at our oil and gas portfolio in the United States, and this work continued in 2019 under that same portfolio because you can't understand what's happening with a single pilot. So you do have to expand your analyses on climate change that come from that. And then in 2019 through 2020, Citibank as a bank started the pilot program for the United Nations, where we started to include all these issues starting in Mexico. So we are the first bank in Mexico that began to develop this. We are now understanding, we've analyzed two portfolios, the agribusiness portfolio and the real estate portfolio. And speaking about operations, since we are a bank with a decent footprint as far as the number of branch offices that we have and our operations as a whole, there I can also tell you that we are under the commitment to become 100% renewable and achieve neutrality using electric energy. We achieved this actually as of last year. As of last year, we are consuming upwards of 30% of our energy as renewable, and we're also buying certain bonds to complete what we are still lacking. We are increasing our renewable energy consumption.
No ha sido fácil, la verdad es que es un tema muy
And it
retador.
has not been easy. It's actually a very challenging issue, but we are working on that as well.
Regresar al tema de
And if I may go back to financing very briefly,
la meta, les comentaría
just to talk about the goal, I would say that
también,
in Mexico,
pues México tiene
we,
que estar en esta meta.
well, specifically Mexico
Así que
also has to contribute to the goal. So,
que hemos estado trabajando
and just like our other peers have to as well. So we have been developing and incorporating that same taxonomy for financial,
local, hemos
for finance in corporate
desarrollar
governance. That is, we are working in developing funds, for example,
ya tenemos fondos, una oferta de fondos de
for wealth management. We have an investment fund as well for ESG that basically is
que es nuestro
being established together with BlackRock, which is our partner in this initiative,
iniciativa. Lo que hacemos es que buscamos
where we are
mejores empresas en términos
seeking out and determining the best companies on the environmental governance and and social aspects, and we highlight those with our clients.
que está
We now
disponible,
have
pero no nada más
a second application for these funds available,
en la creación ad hoc, ¿no?
and we've been working in the ad hoc creation
de créditos sostenibles,
of sustainable credit, sustainable loans,
por ejemplo, o de bonos verdes, bonos sociales, bonos sociales,
green bonds, social bonds, sustainable bonds.
tipos de instrumentos.
We've engaged in all these kinds of instruments,
Incluso ahí tenemos también buenos trabajos desarrollados
and we have even done extensive development and have had experience
sobre temas
in
temas sociales.
entrepreneurship and social issues, etc.
Estamos creando
So
teoría, estamos trabajando
we are now not only at the theory phase, but we're also working in our day-to-day, in our actual business,
operaciones y lo más
with these things in mind as well,
importante es, como te decía, puedan transitar.
making it so that our clients can transition into this new stage
Es inminente y que
that is here and now and is a reality today. And I'll
Alan, muchísimas gracias. Pues
thank
mucho,
you so much, Alan.
mucho pasando.
That's a lot between the Rio Bravo and Sumacinta. Let's continue now with Franco in Colombia. Franco, the Bancolombia Group has been a regional pioneer in reaching markets with innovative products such as green bonds and sustainable bonds as well. For some years now, you've been in the stock market in that sense, but that road towards sustainability does require more aggressive corporate strategies and more comprehensive strategies on which you have much experience. So what is the group doing? What are your goals, and how are you engaging with other stakeholders in the region? Thank you, Eduardo, for your question. First, I would begin with our goal, which ultimately is to drive innovation connected with sustainable development goals globally. And of course, climate change is also involved in our initiatives. So with that, we are engaging with our individual clients as well as with companies and other stakeholders, just like you're saying.
Y hemos tenido, digamos, la posibilidad de avanzar en esa dinámica durante los últimos años. Entonces,
we have always held these initiatives in mind when moving forward. So just very quickly, let's see what our initiatives have looked like in recent times.
De las estrategias sectoriales, entonces también cómo las acompañamos en esa dinámica. Entonces, hemos venido haciendo financiamiento para producción más limpia, que ha venido mutando hacia temas de economía circular, un poco más de diseño y sofisticación de los modelos, asimismo temas de construcción sostenible, de movilidad baja en emisiones, de todos los componentes asociados a energías renovables, a temas de eficiencia energética en componentes de industria, una visión de agrosostenible y un uso de la tierra más adaptado a temas de cambio climático. Y eso ha venido generando, entre otras temáticas, una dinámica importante en la ruta. Todo eso viene atravesado con estrategias de género, de inclusión, de educación financiera para ponerlos en una ruta integral y viene avanzando de una manera interesante en la organización. Entonces, desde aquí hemos venido consolidando toda una propuesta de valor en esa ruta.
We have been consolidating a whole proposal to drive our value chain for our clients. Where we see that there is a very interesting juncture right now. Sorry, his audio is very hard to make out. But many other projects can be connected to these instruments in that same regard. We have been structuring products such as credits tied to the sustainability initiatives, and have been speaking to our clients and with that same climate aspect in mind. We have also been looking at other forms of investments, some at the corporate level, some at the collective level, and even at the individual level. So that's the way we have been engaging with individual and corporate clients. And this involves not only financial products, but also non-financial products. That is, it is a more systemic view in our initiatives, working with our various stakeholders. That's kind of a very broad overview of what we've been doing. Again, with this ambition of mobilizing resources for the coming 10 years in the amount of $140 billion, which at the Colombian level is a significant effort. And this, of course, represents a very consolidated view towards sustainable development as a whole.
Va a tener una apuesta significativa en esa ruta. Y yo quiero aquí, en esta última parte, Eduardo, centrarme ya en el tema del cambio climático, que es lo que nos convoca. Y es empezar
Lastly, I would focus on climate change. Our strategy has been aligned towards climate change with certain goals. And the first part of the first part of these goals has to do with MRV.
Y también es un mensaje de cara a nuestros clientes, al sector privado, que, por ejemplo, mostró ruta similar en el primer panel. ¿Cómo mitigar las emisiones? Hoy en día nuestras emisiones del alcance 2002 están realizadas, tenemos ahí cero neto en emisiones, ya porque tenemos 100% de nuestra energía en renovables o porque los diferenciales que generamos están siendo compensados a través del mercado de carbono, pero siempre la estrategia es mitigue y después de que mitigue, compense o certifique en términos de lo que pueda el mercado entrar a ofrecer, y son mercados que se vienen sofisticando más en la región. Pero lo primero siempre va a ser la medición, y en esa ruta fuimos avanzando. Lo siguiente era entender e identificar con esa medición qué escenarios se abrían en la ruta. Y ahí empezamos a incorporar el alcance 3, que es finalmente donde tenemos más impacto. Y ya en un rato voy con cifras en esa ruta. Esa medición, utilizando metodologías como las de TUIGRIF, nos permitió entender escenarios climáticos para 9 industrias de nuestros clientes, donde van a haber unas disrupciones importantes en los próximos años, dado la variabilidad climática. Entonces hicimos escenarios climáticos de 2, 4 y 6 grados al año 2050 y empezamos a entender los impactos que iban a tener nuestros clientes en esa industria, en esas industrias, en términos de precios, en términos de demanda y cómo se iban a afectar los estados financieros y por ende el riesgo crediticio que estábamos asumiendo a largo plazo, dado el riesgo climático. Es una conexión importante entre las finanzas y el clima, que es lo que nos muestra claramente también que sí aplica como herramienta de desarrollo. Entonces, lo que queda teniendo como esa identificación, lo siguiente era decidir qué vamos a hacer en esa dinámica. Y avanzamos en la medición del alcance 3 de nuestro financiamiento. Nuestra huella de carbono directa es de 20.000 toneladas de CO2. Es pequeña. Como lo mencionaba Alan, ahí hay una operación que genera pocas emisiones a nivel de industria, pero ojo, que es que en el financiamiento donde está el impacto indirecto y significativo. Ahí tenemos 4.3 millones de toneladas de CO2 que están en 9 industrias y que representan para el caso de Colombia cerca del 3% de las emisiones totales del país. Entonces ahí tenemos una incidencia significativa y empezamos entonces a tomar decisiones. Tenemos medición, tenemos una identificación de estrategias y necesitamos decidir en esa ruta. ¿Qué decisiones se han tomado en esa ruta estratégica? Tenemos 3 acciones planteadas en el escenario. La primera, un coal phase out. Vamos a disminuir nuestra exposición en la industria de minería de carbón y en la generación térmica de carbón en esta década. El objetivo fundamental es poder reducir las emisiones hasta el 2030 para ubicarnos en ese escenario. Ya nuestros clientes en estas industrias lo saben, hemos conversado directamente con ellos y estaremos acompañando financiamiento hasta el año 2025 y haciendo un acompañamiento de reducción de emisiones hasta el año 2030. Entonces, es el primer ejercicio y eso nos va a ayudar a disminuir cerca del 32% de las emisiones que tenemos en el programa. Segunda estrategia en esa misma ruta está asociada al acompañar a 8 industrias en su transición hacia una economía de desarrollo bajo carbono. Aquí tenemos industrias como las del petróleo y el gas, hierro y acero, el cemento, la ganadería, el transporte en diferentes categorías, y va en esa dinámica. Ahí concentramos aproximadamente un 38% de las emisiones del portafolio y el objetivo fundamental es alinear esas actividades al índice de Colombia, que implica reducir 51% de las emisiones al año base y eso implica un acompañamiento de estas industrias para hacerlo de una manera más eficiente, más efectiva y más competitiva. Y el tercer escenario para garantizar ese balanceo entre carbono es donde tenemos aproximadamente cerca del 21% de las emisiones, pero tenemos el 93% de nuestra cartera. Entonces ahí está el resto de las industrias y lo que estamos haciendo ahí es ir de una manera muy decidida con esos 14 millones de dólares que vamos a financiar en esta década a garantizar el balanceo en términos de las emisiones. ¿Qué implica esto? Vamos a estar financiando de una manera agresiva, con mucho apetito de riesgo, temas como la movilidad baja en emisiones, la construcción sostenible, soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, economía circular, energías renovables, eficiencia energética. Todo esto va a ser parte de un portafolio que va a llevar servicios financieros y no financieros a nuestros clientes y el objetivo fundamental en ese balance es llegar a un escenario de cero emisiones netas que nos ubiquen al 2050. Ubicarnos al 2050 es fácil. Nuestros clientes van a hacer el ejercicio. Si ellos son cero emisiones netas, nosotros en el financiamiento lo vamos a hacer. Queremos generar una ambición para ubicarnos en la mitad de la próxima década, la década del 2030 al 2040, en un escenario que nos ubique en un espectro de cero emisiones netas. Ahí creo que debemos movilizarnos. El mensaje del llamado de urgencia, lo mencionaba igualmente Gonzalo, y es por donde quisiera ir en esa ruta, Eduardo, para ir, digamos, teniendo aquí un poco mi intervención y dejar para las siguientes preguntas en la conversación. Adelante.
Excelente, Franco, muchísimas gracias. Y como decías, hay que llegar a emisiones.
Thank you so much, Franco. And yes, just like you're saying, we do have to achieve that net zero emissions, and there's very little time, and there's also very little time for this panel. So for the next series of questions, we will ask that you please be as brief and environmentally economic or effective as possible. Maria, will continue with you. And it seems as though the race to climate change has involved stakeholders that before were not sitting at the table. You spoke of regulators. How is the IDB engaging with financial regulators and non-financial regulators? Because we are talking about others who had never been in these markets to now come in to talk about markets in Latin America. Thank you so much. I think that they are playing an increasingly important role. In our department, we have been working with regulators in the financial market, both with central banks as well as with other stakeholders, where there is a opportunity available. It's been there for the last 5 years, I would say, where international stakeholders now increasingly understand the role and the impact of and the gravity of not doing anything when it comes to climate change. It is now seen as a major financial risk. So basically what we're doing, or what we're seeing, is that what the bank finances as a whole does entail significant exposure, not just to the climate risks, but also in terms of assets, long-term assets that would not necessarily be good, quote unquote, for climate change. There are parts of the economy that are still, let's say, strongly dependent on fossil fuels, etc. So there is awareness globally at the financial level, and we've seen this in the MGFS, for example, and others, and also with YOSCO. who are now drawing attention to the fact that regulators must start to estimate and understand how these risks translate and are managed by banks. So beyond the opportunities that I spoke of at first, because we do see that green investments, particularly in our region, are extremely important. We do see a major opportunity there, but there's also this matter of exposure, risk exposure. And that's why it's really important that regulators play a much more active role in that regard. We see what is happening now, and that is that regulators are now speaking to the market to create best practices so that banks, such as the banks that are present here, can respond with comprehensive and institutional strategies, not just as it pertains to their portfolios, as risk analyses usually do, but it's also about seeing how my portfolio of projects can lead to me being less exposed in the future. And this entails things such as metrics and analysis that, frankly, is not there today. So we've been working extensively at the IDB to develop strategies, methodologies, and tools and platforms that will allow banks to perform these analyses. Oftentimes, for example, in the agricultural or forestry sectors, they're not always seen with the same level of detail as they are in Europe. So it's also about capitalizing these risk analyses. And for that, a lot of work has been done. But there's also the carbon market, since we're talking about carbon today. The role of regulators there, I think, is key. If we want these markets and carbon pricing to lead to positive things, then regulators have to very well understand that business ecosystems have to be created. We've been working with AIDA and others where we are holding a series of events trying to foster more knowledge on that. But I would go back to what I said initially. Legal assurances around assets and the possibilities of carbon credits, and oftentimes the lack of information and transparency, all these things can become a significant issue. And hence the key role that regulators have in that regard. Regulators must work together with the markets, and therefore we are making many efforts in boosting this through our dialogue, just like we've done in Chile, for example, where we have a major initiative with Chile underway, and also with Brazil, with a financial laboratory. Okay, I'll stop here, but that was basically it in a nutshell. Thank you so much, Maria. And thanks to everyone. Actually, we have 4 minutes for the entire panel left, so we have to be very quick. Almost like gold medalists. Alan, we'll continue with you. You spoke about the TCRB that plays a critical role in information dissemination. So what is the relationship with that methodology to disseminate information, and what kind of progress has there been in Latin America, and how has it helped in creating carbon markets? What is the relationship between the methodologies? I'll leave you the question. And just like Messi, you must be quick and you must stay in Barcelona. No, this is a very complicated issue to resolve in 2 minutes, but I'll try, but I'll give it my best. The TCFB's recommendations, hopefully many of you know about them, but I can tell you very quickly that the TCFB recommendations are a framework that establishes dissemination on how climate change is addressed in the organization, be it financial or other. And it also establishes a governance framework and a strategy, or it helps to establish a strategy or make your strategy more robust. That also helps you to see how you are addressing climate aspects in risk analyses and in the entire organization. So we're talking about a matter that is cross-cutting and that is strategic and that speaks to the survival of your organization over time based on climate change. That would be the first thing. So dissemination at the global level has grown. Latin America is no exception. Roughly at the global level, as of 2019, we have over 1,500 organizations that have come on board to support the TCFD, plus over 60% of the largest organizations in the world are also now incorporating and disseminating the TCFD's recommendations. So the trend is growing strongly, and regulators are also on board, just like we just heard. And international standards such as IFRS are also becoming involved and are developing standards that will govern us to that effect. So again, it's here to stay. Now, what companies have made the most progress as far as dissemination? These would be mostly the energy companies, materials companies. And in Latin America, we are somewhat delayed. We are lagging. In Latin America, there are more organizations coming on board, though, namely Brazil, with 3.5% of its organizations globally, and Mexico with 1.3%. So we're saying that we have a huge challenge. I mean, we could say that in every Latin American country, there are at least one or two organizations already on board, but we are still far from the goal. The most significant progress is really being seen in Europe and Asia. Regarding markets themselves, I can tell you that the strategy and the TCFD recommendations do provide a huge opportunity for organizations that participate in carbon markets, because again, it helps them to establish and formalize their corporate governance that does look at climate change impacts on the strategy, and this helps them, of course, in providing follow-up and establishing commitments. Since you have the entire organization on board committed as well, it helps you to understand financial planning and risk strategies. And this, in the end, will have an impact on the cash flow and the company's performance. In addition to, as if that were very little, in addition to investments and investor engagement, it helps in their decision making. So the TCFD recommendations become key for companies to engage in carbon markets. I would stop there. Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you. Franco, let's go with you now, because Alan was just mentioning the investors and the investment sector. And here I would ask you this question, because just a month ago, a group of institutional investors in Colombia agreed to increase the quality of environmental, social, and corporate governance information. Franco, environmental dissemination, how do you see environmental dissemination in the Colombian market today? And what do you see on the investor side? What has changed recently? We have just a few seconds. Eduardo, we were actually part of that solicitation from the market, and we have been putting it into practice. And this is a message to everyone. The need for detailed information is growing. Why? Because there is a significant risk scenario and also opportunities. Those who do not keep the climate in mind will have difficulties in finding success. These matters will only become more complex over time. With these things in mind, a better roadmap can be established that will lead to better performance, financially speaking. So dissemination is a very key point, and Maria mentioned this as well. And of course, Alan made special note of that in a very practical way. As we offer better information to the market that allows for better decision-making, we will have more opportunities and a better opportunity scenario. And that will be decisive so that we are better prepared for what's coming. And what's coming is very complicated. So that's clearly the path that we are undertaking. Thank you. Excellent, Franco. Thank you so much. And I'm taking away what you just said. What is to come is complex, and we have to work in every field, just like Maria mentioned, including regulators. And also, like Alan mentioned, TCFB offers many opportunities, many alternatives for governance, for corporate governance systems that include solutions having to do with carbon markets. With that, we'll conclude this panel, and I thank you all very much for your efforts in being here and for talking to us about these matters. Thanks to everyone. Alexis, we'll kick it back to you, and thanks to everyone who connected.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. Are we here? Yes, we're here. Thank you, Eduardo Piquero, and to all of our panelists as well. Great panel. We are now coming to the end of our webinar, and to close this virtual event, I invite Luis Gilberto Murillo, former Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development from 2016 to 2018, who will give us some thoughts on carbon neutrality in Colombia. Luis Gilberto is a mining engineer from he's a mining engineer and also has a master's in the same engineering. He is the former governor of the Department of Chocó in Colombia and is a political analyst at the International Agency on World Relief and is currently the counselor for environmental solutions at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT. Minister, welcome.
Muchas gracias, Alexis.
Thank you very much, Alexis, for your kind introduction. I'm very pleased to be at this very important event. A special thanks to all the organizers, AIDA, the Ministry of Environment, USAID, the Ministry, to the Ministry, and to all the analysts with their very enriched insights, given their broad experience in building in your respective countries and in the world, to find a way out of not just the climate crisis, but the other crises that mankind is experiencing. Here at MIT, we are also trying to address those same questions that you have posed. And to that, I would like to provide some thoughts on the carbon neutrality mechanism and carbon markets and environmental climate policy and sustainable development in Colombia that some of you who are here might know of or have worked with together with me. I see Franco and others. Well, I can't see everyone's names, but I know we have worked together with many of you. So the first point, Alexis, has to do with the fact that, and we just heard this, with the fact that it's important to continue to innovate in public policy, in having a very fluid conversation between the private sector, the public sector, communities, and civil society. The carbon tax and the carbon neutrality mechanism for non-causation, that is something to highlight in environmental policy in Colombia. It's what I have called the Colombian model for the voluntary carbon market because it is quite innovative. And it connects with something that we've heard today from the panelists, and it is the need to generate more information and to educate more on these kinds of innovative mechanisms that the region has. In that regard, it is a collective effort that came from a tax reform in 2016. And that, in addition to that, became regulatory mechanisms, Decree 926 of 2017, namely, to also ensure transparency in the market. And for transparency, another regulatory tool was issued, Ministry Resolution 1487 from 2018 that I issued. And I think these public policy innovations are really important to the country but are not necessarily known as they should be known, which leads me to my next thought, which has more to do with the work that was done collaboratively. That is, we went from conflict and arguments to a strategic conversation. And that made it so that the private sector and civil society organizations and the communities themselves could move forward in the same direction. And another thing that was based on what was already built by the financial sector and pilot programs and international cooperation, including USAID, that had many interesting projects with organizations such as Fondo Acción or Conservation International. I think all these things were key in moving forward with this mechanism. Something really important to highlight here is that this collaborative work resulted in a new institutional culture when implementing that market. Even the way in which the trade group was structured, Asocarbono, involves not only investors and your classical stakeholders, but also other market agents that go much beyond the market world. This includes indigenous groups and Afro-descendants and campesino groups who are a key part of Asocarbono as a whole. It's a very interesting model for the region to look at and apply. We have to recognize, however, that there is always room for growth and improvement at the institutional level, in growing technical capacity, in public-private partnerships, and in engaging with community agents under these dynamics, these market dynamics. There, I would highlight that this has made it so that Colombia is now offering high-quality carbon. I have to acknowledge, though, that recently we saw certain publications where the carbon neutrality market in Colombia was stimulating tax evasion and the loss of public income. But that is far removed from the truth. The evidence shows that it is quite the opposite case when it comes to finance and climate finance in the country. And I would emphasize that we are still lacking in dissemination. There is room for growth, of course, but it is still true that looking at the lessons learned and the opportunities that Colombia has currently and Latin America has currently does involve this non-causation mechanism and voluntary carbon markets. Colombia is the country is a country with mega diversity, with Afro-descendant, indigenous, and farmer and local communities as well. And this has huge implications for voluntary carbon markets. It has implications in conserving biodiversity, in protecting culture and well-being. And these are no small matters. However, they are oftentimes ignored by the critics of the mechanism. And again, I insist on the fact that dissemination is still lacking and information has been lacking in the achievements of this mechanism. But I must make it very clear that Colombia is becoming increasingly strong in regulations. There are public policy instruments in place and is engaging with the stakeholders in these initiatives, especially developers, and must show that the impact that is being seen in the territories are verifiable, they are being done transparently, and with a special emphasis on transparency and environmental integrity, together with an emphasis on establishing just agreements with the communities. There, this is extremely important when engaging through the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. And my last thought is that this mechanism, and this has to be widely known, has had a great impact. For example, the DIAN, which is the National Tax Authority, established that ever since the carbon neutrality mechanism has been in place, upwards of 50 million tons of CO2 equivalent have been offset. That represents $250 million, which is no small thing. And the financial geography has even changed around this market and others. That is, many of these resources are now flowing into regions that previously would not receive these kinds of regions, such as the Colombian Pacific region, where there is a mostly Afro-descendant and indigenous population with a significant supply of natural assets, biodiversity, forests, etc. So that is an extremely important impact. But despite these figures, there's still an unsatisfied demand in the 100 million tons that are yet to be achieved in carbon bonds. This means that the non-taxation mechanism has only been able to compensate for 30% of the emissions from fossil fuels. So there is still a huge gap to be closed, a huge potential as well, speaking specifically about Colombia. That is why it is imperative that we strengthen local initiatives and build more technical capacity. We need more capacity in Latin America and the Caribbean. Colombia is no exception. That is how we can leverage the leadership potential that the region has in creating climate change solutions, nature-based climate solutions, and the markets, of course, in which these solutions work. There is no question that Colombia is at the leading edge in implementing these kinds of instruments with more, with greater financial instruments, with a broader offering. And that is extremely important when responding to the challenges that we have around climate change and extreme climate, emphasizing the comprehensiveness of this mechanism to protect biodiversity, but also in improving the living conditions and quality of life for many communities in Colombia. Hence, the importance of this seminar, because the role and the commitment by the private sector are extremely key. That would be my call to action in closing. We must continue to insist on the private sector and its collaboration with the public sector through regulators, with civil society, and with local communities in the territories. Thank you very much, Alexis. Luis Gilberto Murillo, thank you so much for your important thoughts. After having heard about these very important subjects through these corporate leaders, we thank all of you for participating in this webinar on carbon markets and the private sector's commitment. This was the third of a series of 4 seminars whose final event will look at the Latin American perspective on Article 6, specifically 6.2, 6.4. Regarding the, given the success we've had with the first 3 seminars, the promoters of this webinar, AEDA, Asocarbono, and USAID, have decided to have the first climate summit in Latin America and the Caribbean, which will be held in Cartagena, Colombia, from October 6th to October 8th, with the support of the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development in Colombia. The summit will focus on the carbon market experiences in the Americas on day 1, the outlooks on Article 6 and sectorial markets in the second day, and then nature-based solutions to conclude day 3. The event will be in person and will have all the biosecurity measures in place as needed in these times. If you're interested, please contact info@asocarbono.org or secretariat@aeta.org. Thank you so much.